I went on a journey through the occult, supernatural, and terrifying. This is my 13 days of Halloween. October is the scary month, the Halloween month, and I've always liked the aesthetic and vibes of Halloween, and I find it to be one of the best holidays. However, I've only scratched the surface of horror movies. The genre never really appealed to me or my interest in film. I find most horror movies to feel very formulaic and overuse cheap tactics to give a sense of investment that have failed to stick with me afterwards. The same basic plots, musical cues, camera movements, and cliches repeated ad nauseum. You know what I'm talking about. A car slowly driving by, the virgin surviving, the nightmare sequences people wake up from. But this year, I decided to go headfirst into horror. There has to be something I'm missing, and hopefully throwing myself into the genre and giving it a fair shot will change me into a fan. So I collected a group of movies that are new to me. I tried to vary up the style of movies. I have some modern movies, some old classics, classic slashers, gothic horror, horror comedy, foreign horror. I'm casting as big of a net as I can. I switched out movies for hours before I finally landed on this list. Also, keep in mind that these had to be new to me, so none of these movies qualified even if I love them. But now, time to embark on the journey. One, I might not return the same person I was when I left. The Shining is my third Kubrick film and my favorite so far. This just felt like the right place to start. Number 88 on the most recent Sight and Sound list, regularly tops lists of best horror movies ever made, and endlessly referenced in pulp culture. It's kind of amazing I haven't seen this yet. If you didn't know, The Shining is about Jack Torrance and his family going to live in an isolated hotel after he accepts a job as the winter groundskeeper. Jack previously dislocated Danny, his son's, shoulder in a drunken rage, but has remained sober since. Jack is also warned that a previous groundskeeper went mad and killed his family while staying there. And you'd never guess it, but Jack's mental health starts to worsen as he sees visions of murdering his family. Danny goes into room 237 despite being warned not to by the head chef. They share sidekick abilities. Don't ask, I don't have time to explain it. Wendy finds Danny hurt and blames Jack. He insists it wasn't him. A ghost then tempts Jack back to drinking, and Wendy finds the manuscript he has been writing this whole time. It's the same line over and over. Jack threatens to kill Wendy and Danny. Wendy and Jack fight, she runs away, the kid is possessed by a ghost, the one iconic scene happens.
Here's Johnny!
The Shining is really solid. This is a legitimately scary movie. It will become more apparent, but I don't really find ghosts, magic, or the occult all that scary. But a person slowly loses their mind, becoming more and more unstable, being trapped in a hotel with a man that has a history of violence as he grows further frustrated. As he returns to the bottle and lashes out. That is scary. The Shining uses the worst side of humanity for its fears. This is a real situation you could find yourself in, a human situation. And Jack Nicholson sells the unhinged downward spiral perfectly. At the start, he was a man already frustrated with his writer's block, but he approached it calmly and level-headed. Then a burst of frustration happens, the first hints, but he calms down and keeps the murder thoughts at bay. And by the end, Nicholson throws everything into this unhinged monster. He has lost all his humanity and is a different person. And acting opposite him is Shelley Duvall, who seals the horror. There's an uneasiness to her performance, maybe due to onset tensions and having her lines cut, or maybe because she's just good. This is the first real movie of hers I've seen, and she left quite the impression. Her acting in this has gotten a reputation for being cartoony, dating back to when it first came out, but I disagree with that notion of it being cartoony. It's one of the realest performances I've ever seen. She gives unadulterated fear and panic. The character of Wendy is at unseen stress and fear levels. She doesn't need to be some perfect murder victim with just the right amount of fear. Shelley sells the situation perfectly, the panic and how one would react to that. I think if Wendy wasn't as terrified as she was, the entire movie would fall flat. You need this deep emotional reaction to seeing her husband go on a rampage. Since Stanley Kubrick directed this, it's obviously good. There are little to no flaws in the technical aspect of the filmmaking, great cinematography, production design, and editing. But I personally have a problem with Kubrick as a director. His movies feel a little too clean-cut for me. He finally combed every edge of this movie. Makes his movies feel like they were manufactured rather than built. He always tried to make the most perfect movie, but that doesn't translate to the best. I find his movies to have very little distinct personalities. Sure, you can refine a movie to greatness on a technical scale, but so can anyone if given the time and budget. I want a movie to feel special and personal, not distant and lab-grown. From one of the all-time classics to one of the most influential horror movies of the past decade. Hereditary is the modern horror movie. I've largely avoided it, partially due to me not being in love with the horror genre, but also I hated Ari Aster's Beau's Afraid. But now I'm going in with an open mind. Annie's mom dies. Her family, husband, Steve, 16-year-old son, Peter, and 13-year-old daughter are not a normal family. Annie has a really weird relationship with her deceased mom, not knowing all that much about her. But that mom was Charlie's main caretaker. There's very clearly some generational weirdness and improper parenting going on. Annie insists Peter take Charlie to a party with him. Charlie accidentally eats a cake with walnuts, which she is allergic to. Peter rushes her to the hospital, and as she sticks her head out the window, gets decapitated by a telephone pole. This drives a wedge between an already rocky family. Peter becomes despondent as he battles with the guilt of killing his sister, while Annie is enraged and resents Peter for killing his sister. Steve tries playing the middleman and managing both sides. Everything up until this point is great. I was super into the entire thing. The family started to grow more desperate and become detached from one another. A mature and scary look at grief and how all-consuming it can be. Annie and Peter fight, both feeling the loss of a family member, both blaming Peter, while nobody is comforting either of them. I am in love with horror movies taking this route of deterioration of the mind. How an accident could tear a person's psyche apart and drive them mad. Real, feelable stakes. But unfortunately, we are only at the halfway point of the movie.
Remember your chalkboard? Can you write something?
Turns out, there's a ghost that is stalking the family trying to sacrifice them. A coven of witches Annie's mom was a part of, and a demon king looking to find a host. There are seances, possessions, occultists, blood sacrifices. There was a notebook from Charlie detailing how she wants to brutally murder Peter. And where the hell did any of this come from? Did the movie want us to feel the panic and urgency the characters were in the moment? Because I didn't. I couldn't care when Steve or Annie killed themselves and Peter fell out the window. Then some dumb orb possessed the body of Peter, and that orb is Charlie, who is the Demon King. What is any of this? Why was Charlie a Demon King? She seemed like a normal kid to me. It's all so meaningless. I despise this horror bullshit. Just a bunch of spooky nonsense. The make-believe cults, demons, and ghosts are the exact opposite of The Shining. I want horror that is actually scary, not this manufactured supernatural stuff. It is very reminiscent of the work of wrestler Bray Wyatt. The character of Wyatt was a cult leader with terrifying bearded men behind him. He was scary because he had power and control over people. When his first video package showed up, I was terrified. And then he started to wrestle, and they were scary because they were good. They were a real, palpable threat. But then he started being supernatural, talking about the moon, teleporting, and a bunch of other magic. he very quickly became lame and the least scary person ever. That's what Hereditary felt like. It went from a great, unsettling psychological horror to a goofy cult and other magical creatures. The reason I hate the ending is because it reminds me of the worst of Wyatt. Rambling, unscary magic. Magic cheapens all the work you built. I wish I could ignore the last third of this thing, but I can't. It's probably irrational, but I just have to walk away wondering what this could have been. Of course I had to get a Drac on the list. He's the horror icon. I had dozens of movies to pick from, but in the end it came down to two. Hotel Transylvania 2 or Bram Stoker's Dracula. And I decided that Hotel Transylvania 2 might be a little too scary. I don't know if I'd be able to sleep after watching that one. So I settled on Francis Ford Coppola's Bram Stoker's Dracula. Vlad's wife kills herself after falsely being told he was dead. Then, after being told she was sent to hell for committing suicide, Vlad burns down a chapel and renounces Christianity. He then stabs some stone, which bleeds somehow. I'm not entirely sure why this particular cross was able to bleed, but Vlad drinks from it for some weird reason and becomes a vampire. He doesn't just become a vampire, he becomes the vampire. There are too many different plot lines to fully summarize. But a guy comes to help Dracula with real estate. Once Dracula sees a picture of Mina, the man's fiancée, he becomes convinced she's the reincarnated version of his past life and makes it his mission to reunite with her. Good guys fight Dracula, but he bites some people, including Mina. Dracula and Mina sort of fall in love, but vow to marry. But Dracula is dying. Mina does the final blow, and Drac is actually reunited with his wife in heaven. There is more here. Renfield and Van Helsing, Mina's friend, they really threw everything at the wall for this one and stuffed it full of Dracula storylines, and it all manages to work. The strongest aspect of this has to be its aesthetic and look, a gothic period piece bursting with color and detail. This is a movie where pretty much any single frame could be hung up on your wall as an art piece. The sets and costume are god tier. The depth and texture in anything worn is super impressive. The dress worn by Lacey, or any dress Mina wears, the robes Dracula wears, his armor. A lot of them are strange, adding to the gothic and off-kilter mood. None of these clothes are normal. They belong in a world where a crazy vampire is on a revenge quest against God. The colors popping off the screen. I love vibrant movies, and this managed to be that despite the darker tone. Almost every actor nails their role perfectly. Keanu Reeves is a little dorky and out of his league, which becomes extra apparent next to Gary Oldman's Dracula and Winona Ryder's Mina.
I am Dracula. And I bid you welcome, Mr. Harcourt, to my house.
Gary Oldman is perfectly large, intimidating, and strange for Dracula. He chews up every scene he is in, plays the heartbroken lover longing for his dead fiancée so well. Gary Oldman is acting a lot. He is constantly giving the most. It makes the few moments when he pulls back and goes more subtle that much more impactful. At the same time, Winona Ryder plays Dracula's counterpart very well, a more reserved performance that peaks only to return to a lower level. Another longing lover, but she has a hope that hers will return. In the opposite way of Dracula, it hits harder. These bursts of emotion from a normally quiet character are an excellent way to show the emotion. There's also so much to unpack with this story, a winding tale about love, pent-up love, grief, religion, and social outcast. This movie weaves all of these ideas together to create something truly of its own. Vampires are the ultimate commitment in terms of love. Turning your partner one is forever. It is not until death do us part, because they don't die. Dracula is chasing women endlessly, having many wives, but it never fills the hole Elisabetta left. Once he is finally accepted and learned he doesn't want revenge, then he can reunite with his designated lover. I don't know if I'll fully be able to describe it, but this movie has a weight to it. It's grand and feels as if it has history, if it was passed down through generations to arrive here. The story of Dracula has gone through generations. Bram Stoker wrote the book back in 1897, 100 years before this movie came out. It's that long history that makes the movie feel as massive and mythic as it is. Everyone knows who Dracula is, and this is by far the best adaptation of him I've seen. Nosferatu feels like an essential watch for a horror deep dive. The oldest movie on this list is often considered one of the first great horror films, older than anyone I know or have known my entire life. It is also a good watch because of the Robert Eggers remake coming out soon. The plot. A guy comes to help a vampire, Nosferatu, with real estate. Nosferatu finds a picture of his fiancée and falls in love, so traveling and fighting later, Nosferatu is taken in by the wife, and they embrace while the sun rises as he dies. If this sounds like they took Dracula's story and changed it up a little bit so the teacher wouldn't notice, you'd be right. This is ripped almost beat for beat from Dracula. There's not much new with the story here. Now, today, this isn't the best movie ever made. It could have been, at the time, but it's always interesting to go back and look at old movies. The thing I noticed about this one was just how many title cards it had. The story would be incoherent if it wasn't for a block of text showing up every minute and a half. I would have been lost. It's a lack of creativity from an otherwise groundbreaking movie. I realize silent movies most likely need some kind of title card. People didn't know how to watch movies yet. But every time I started to sink into the visuals, they would throw an essay at me. The first third was decently fun. I was getting invested. But then it turns to boring nothingness for a little while. That kind of kills my attention, not picking up until the last 5-ish minutes. The actual traveling is so uninteresting. This does have some great horror elements. The design of Nosferatu is creepy and otherworldly. He is so freaky and monstrous. The design, overall, is very impressive. Some great big sets. I can appreciate this for the technical ability involved, for laying the foundations many later films would be built on. But that's all it is to me, a tech demo.
Ein Junges ist auf dem Weg. Aber ihre Mutter wird uns Schwierigkeiten bereiten, jetzt wo sie keinen Nestling mehr hat.
Going from the oldest movie on the list to the newest. I immediately knew I needed a 2024 movie on the list. Since I was going to go with new watches, I couldn't put I Saw the TV Glow on here, which is in the running for my favorite movie of the year. Would highly recommend watching if you haven't. But because I couldn't do that, I decided to go with Cuckoo. Gretchen moves in with her father, Louis, his wife, Beth, and their daughter, Alma, in the Alps. She starts working at a hotel earned by her, Carnegie, and weird things start to happen. Weird people walking by, people throwing up, your half-sister having a seizure while talking to you, a hooded woman trying to kill you. All perfectly normal things for the Alps. After a fight with her father, Gretchen locks herself in her room. Up until this point, we have mostly just spent time with Gretchen trying to adjust to her new life and figure out what the hell is going on. She tried to escape, but it didn't work. I was invested in her as a character, even if I wasn't sure about all the spooky bullshit around her. This does a phenomenal job at getting you invested in the character, and Hunter Schafer does more than her fair share of leading this. She's great in her role, as is Dan Stevens in his. I've been so burnt out on most of the old Hollywood movie stars for the past 10 years, doing the same types of roles in awful movies. Footage unrelated. I'm hungry for new actors to break out and become serious moneymakers and get creative power. Timmy and Zendaya are there. Sydney and Anya are approaching, but I want Hunter Schafer to get there so badly. She's great in this and proves she's comfortable taking unique roles that aren't super safe traditional movies.
Ja?
Please let me in! Right now! Please!
Komm, ja.
So, up until this point, I was decently invested. But here comes the nonsense. Turns out, there is some human-like parasite that Carnegie is experimenting on. The hooded woman and Alma are both these creatures. The next part gets wild. Carnegie uses this flute thing to summon a girl to infect Gretchen with some slime. None of this was explained up until that point, and never does it end up explained. Why was the flute or slime any part of this? Feels a little like the movie is overstuffed, trying out these wacky ideas. Ultimately, Alma and Gretchen reunite and escape. The broad emotional beats work in this. Gretchen learns to care for Alma and how to properly start grieving her mother's death. This movie throws a lot at the wall. It's very experimental. The editing and cinematography were unlike anything I've seen. I can excuse some bumps in movies when you are trying to push the envelope. It's a mess that isn't sure what it wants to be, but hey, at least it's a fun mess. I put this on the list for one simple reason. My friend recommended it to me. And I guess it's always nice to get that push into more foreign movies. The Wailing is about a small Korean village being consumed by an infection, turning people mad after a Japanese man arrives. Jong-gu is a police officer working on the case. His daughter also gets sick. The infection causes people to rot and turn violent. I very quickly bought into this movie. It reminded me of Memories of Murder at the very beginning, and throughout. But then, just as quickly as I bought in, it started to sour on me. The supernatural elements making me lose interest. The first man to go crazy was clearly under the effect of something. The woman walking up to the police station after the lights cut, and the Japanese man eating a deer on all fours felt like very traditional horror elements that had been used time and time again. So I went on expecting it to be just another nonsense horror. And then the scene of Jung-gu and a woman who has magical powers, Moo Mwong, at the crime scene happened. I was trying to figure the movie out, trying to solve it. But then, Moo Myung disappears and Jung-gu sees the Japanese man and freaks out. Normal stuff. Immediately cuts to Jung-gu waking up, freaking out. My brain starts working in overdrive, like moving faster than it has in a while. It's obvious Jung-gu had a nightmare. And in most horror movies, the previous shot was the dream. But it can't be the case here. At no point is the timeline broken. Jung-gu talks to his partner seconds before this. Seeing the stranger couldn't have been a dream. Or maybe it could have been. It's a brilliant way to set things up. It makes you question the truth. The Wailing uses common horror tropes and bends them beyond their typical usage. It's at that point I fully decided to stop trying to solve the movie. I was just going to feel it out. No overthinking. I was going to watch this gut and heart first, and that's when I got back into this. The setting adds to the mystery and trapped feeling. The small dying mountain town, seemingly cozy on the surface. It's very lived in. The Japanese man's house especially just feels so right. Almost too right. It's not ruined enough to raise a lot of suspicion, nor too clean. The mountain town gives you a trapped vibe. You are stuck in this town and bad things are going down. On top of that, the acting was phenomenal. Switching from light comedy to deeply horrifying on a dime, plays off of each other really well. And yes, this movie is scary. It uses brief flashes of gore and violence throughout. The rash people developing growing boils and blisters is off-putting and gross. The reveal of the first man shocking your system. But they never show too much of the violence. Yes, we get brief shots of the dog attack, but that's pretty much it. The rest of the violence is off-screen and implied. We never see how people become infected, or the people killing their family. You are just shown the aftermath and left to sit in it. The characters are reacting to everything, scared because they don't have the knowledge, and I love that at no point are we given that knowledge either. As an audience, it's refreshing to be given such little power or knowledge. What made me love this movie is that it took control out of my hands and made me feel powerless just like the characters. It kept me second-guessing who and what was evil. And that's a powerful thing for a movie to do. So much of movie watching is meta. There are ways movies are built to make you feel a certain way. Lots of movies give you an easy answer, but there is no easy answer in The Wailing. I don't feel safe at any point, like the characters are not safe. It leaves you void of control, strips away your feelings, much like how you would be in the actual situation. I don't feel like many horror movies make me feel as if I'm living the events, but The Wailing did. And I loved the feeling of hopelessness and lack of power I had. The prime example of this being when Jung-gu has to make his decision at the end of the film. He had to make a call, uncertain which to make, and at the time, I went through the same emotions he did, uncertain which side is evil. The hair clip sealing the deal for me that Mu Muyang was the evil spirit. I would have left too. Very nearly the best scene in the movie. However, the best scene is pretty easily when Il Wang performs the ritual on Hoi Jin, while the stranger does one of his own. This was Il Wang's second ritual. In the first, I was questioning what good him basically attacking Hoi Jin did. The editing on this second ritual was made to force you to believe that the two magical men were fighting each other. The stranger hurting and Il Wang healing. It kept swelling and gave you a sensory overload. You didn't get time to think. It was pure cinema, fully engrossing. I can't sum it up any better. Words do not do this scene justice. And at the end of the Wailing, I'm still not sure about it all. Who is good and who is evil? The closest thing to an easy answer, and the one the movie seems to want you to land on, is the Japanese men and Il Wang are the evil force. They are corrupt. The ritual scene where every time Il Wang peeks, it hurts Hoi Jin. The collecting of photos. The glowing red eyes. The opening scene of the Japanese man fishing. Il Wang later talks about the evil spirit just throwing out bait and seeing who bites. And Mu Muyang wears white, the so-called good color. All signs point to the stranger and Il Wang being the evil force. But I just can't fully buy into that. It all has to do with the last scene in the movie, with a priest visiting the stranger. Their conversation is very layered. The priest asks the Japanese man if he is the devil. The Japanese man never says yes. He says if that's what he is viewed as, it's all he will ever be. He cannot convince this town of the opposite. There is no objective answer here, and maybe it stems from my dislike for the church, but just because a member of the church labels something as demonic doesn't mean it is. Historically, they have a pretty bad track record on that one. Just because you don't understand it doesn't mean it's evil. The Japanese man was more than patient, being okay with having his home broken into, his dog being killed. He doesn't owe anyone a nice face anymore. It helps that he is the one outsider, the one Japanese person. It adds to the validation of the church messaging, deeming minorities as evil. I keep going back to, if you see me as the devil, it doesn't matter. The more I think about it, the more I land on this interpretation of things. In the end, none of it matters. You are powerless. The objective nature of the world makes you unable to know the truth. And while I could walk away, drawing a line in the sand of what's what, I prefer to live in the unknown and lack of control the Wailing puts me in. A special film that has wormed its way into my brain and is likely to stay there for a long time. Now we go into our only doubleheader day with The Evil Dead 1 and 2. I've seen Sam Raimi's Spider-Man trilogy and have always wanted to dive deeper into his filmography, so why not go with his debut and its follow-up? 5 college friends vacation at a secluded cabin in the woods. Great idea. They find a book, an audio recording from an archaeologist, Raymond Noby. The tape recorder activates the Book of the Dead. Then, the friends start to slowly be possessed and attacked by very Shakespearean demons, leaving only Bruce Campbell's Ash to fight off the demons. It's a decently straightforward survival horror. Demons are attacking, you have to fight them off, while also worrying if your friends will turn into one of the ghosts. The Evil Dead is a small production. Only 5 credited actors on a shoestring budget shot on rented cameras by an inexperienced crew. They got lost in the woods on the first day of filming. There were tons of injuries and medical treatment was far away. Sam Raimi was only 20 when this started production. Raimi had close to zero real experience making movies. However, it's hard to tell from the final product. Cinematography and editing are great. The real standout here is the practical effects though. The wiring is super dorky, but it works. The makeup has an insane attention to detail. All of the blood is practical. This is such a great example of using what's available to you to the best of your abilities, on stretching a tiny budget to make your movie look professional. After all of that, I still feel a little down on the movie. My biggest problem is that these characters are blander than white bread. None of them have personality or any defining characteristics. If I didn't know who Bruce Campbell was, I don't think I would have been able to track any of the characters throughout. Even now, I couldn't tell you which one is Ash's sister and which one is his girlfriend. And it doesn't matter. There is nothing to latch onto here other than gore and supernatural nonsense. And we all know how I feel about the supernatural nonsense. While the first Evil Dead was a self-serious survival horror with ghosts giving Shakespearean monologues, the second veers into wacky action comedy. Gone is the supernatural nonsense, now it's silly nonsense. And I love some silly nonsense. This picks up where the first left off. Ash, alone in the woods, fighting off demons, but it's a little different. He immediately uses a chainsaw. And maybe it's just my simple monkey brain, but I love a chainsaw in movies. And some other losers approach the cabin with missing pages of the Book of the Dead. Loads of silliness and misunderstanding happens. In the end, Ash and Annie do some magic, and Ash is transported to the Middle Ages and hailed as a hero who's come to save them. Over-the-top acting, direction, and action. There is a moment, the 5 people are in the cabin, and the one girl tells her boyfriend he is holding her hand a little too tight, to which he responds he isn't holding her hand. Everyone slowly pans over their hand and see it being held by Ash's cut off one. Giant reaction of terror. It's all hammed up and over the top. The characters' reactions are silly because the situation they are in is silly. My personal favorite part in the movie is when Ash attaches a chainsaw to his arm stump and carries a shotgun into a fight with a demon. Screw self-serious horror. Have a little fun. Let your hair down. The Evil Dead 2 goes more Looney Tunes than Shakespeare compared to the first one. Taking horror and making it funny is a genre blend I love. The movie is also so earnest. Sam Raimi clearly loves B-movies, and this emulates those with passion. The slow plan to reveal shot I mentioned is dumb, but it works in the context of the entire movie. The Evil Dead 2 is a complete and total step up from the first one. Took all the best parts, these flashes of directorial and acting brilliance, scaled them up, fleshed them out, and added more fun onto the pile. Now this is some melodramatic 70s cheese. It might not be your cup of tea. It's not mine 100% either. The soap opera melodrama is a little bit too much at times, specifically with Carrie and her mom, Her mom screaming about the devil and how Carrie's gonna burn in hell is a little over the top for me personally. Same with the flowery music during the school scenes. It felt like Carrie was positioned as a goddess or angel, some divine being, better than others around her, and not just some kid. I would connect with this a lot more if Carrie was more normal. I realize the whole point is she's magical, but I don't like it. She could have just been more normal. Time to praise it before I go back to complaining. I don't want this review to be entirely complaining because I enjoyed most of this movie, and it had some really high peaks, filled with fun performances, and the high school drama aspect was fun. The revenge arc is over the top, petty, and mean, exactly what it should be for a high school movie. Made me really hate these kids. Not only are they bullies, but also pig murderers, makes their eventual downfall all the sweeter. I grew to care about Carrie and was invested, although I will say, I did start to like Tommy somehow too. Obviously, I knew he sucked, but as the dance progressed, I just kind of fell for his charm. His reassurance that he did care about Carrie was cute, even if fake. What, up until this point, was a fine movie, burst into the classic at the drop of a bucket. As soon as the bucket of pig blood is dropped on Carrie, we see 10 of the most satisfying and badass minutes ever committed to film. Carrie, soaked in blood, is iconic. The image has stuck in pulp culture for a reason, because it's vivid and awesome. And it has become an all-time great Halloween costume. Her looking like this, trapping everyone in the gym, getting revenge while there's a giant fire behind her is peak. This one scene clears everything else in this movie, leaps ahead of everything. Now, unfortunately, I need to talk about the weird part. The bad part. I mentioned how Carrie felt like a goddess and an angel. This movie felt very voyeuristic over a 16-year-old kid. This could have ruled. All it had to do was not show full frontal nudity of a teenager, especially in the way it did. The whole opening scene of Carrie getting her period was made to be a spectacle, an event that needed dramatic flair to it. We didn't need the shots of blood running down her leg, or her running through the locker room fully naked. It just adds a gross layer to it. This one opening scene detracts from everything. It was completely unnecessary, and I think the divine nature would be wiped away if they didn't include this scene at the start. It sucks. It almost ruins an entire movie. I'm always unsure how to rate a movie like this. The good parts were good, the gross were extremely gross. It is in this weird middle point. Can or should I ignore the bad and focus on the good? And I've come to realize that I can only really tell that with time. This is a big one, isn't it? I had to watch Halloween for this video, even if I didn't really want to. How could I do a Halloween movie video without the movie named after the holiday? Back in freshman year of college, someone put this on in the dorm shortly before Halloween. I sat there for 10 minutes and started to get a headache. I figured it was just because it was late and I needed sleep, so I left. Not a huge horror fan, so I never came back around to it until now. And after about 5 minutes, I started to get a headache. And now, it being twice in a row, it's the movie's fault. They play the same ear-piercing motif over and over. Pretty annoying snippet of sound, right? Try listening to it dozens of times. That sound is the first 30 minutes of Halloween. It is repeated almost non-stop. Then we get a little break from it, a little moment of peace, until it comes back. After that little break, I had a physical reaction to hearing it. I took my headphones off and stood up. This movie did physical harm to me both times I watched it. Other than that, I have my general problems with the movie. First off, I don't find Michael Myers all that scary. The fact that he has always been this violent murderer since he was a kid takes away all of the realness for me. He is some mythical being. And then this movie has all of the tropes. And maybe it's because it started a lot of them. The final girl is a virgin, a car slowly driving by, man in a mask, are all elements of this movie. And maybe worst of all is that they watched The Thing in this, which reminds me I could be spending my time watching a way better movie. After that disappointment of the first movie today, I need to recover the day with a good old-fashioned B movie. So here we are with another doubleheader. I had mentioned how I loved how silly The Evil Dead 2 was. Killer Klowns from Outer Space takes the silly to the max. Also, unironically, my favorite looking movie other than Bram Stoker's Dracula so far. It balances bright, vibrant colors with a dark night sky. I've struggled to write this review. There was very little interesting going on in the story. A bare bones love triangle and one of the worst movie cops ever.
Cranks. Rich little bastards. And shoot them all.
But it has clowns. Well, not clowns exactly. Aliens that just so happen to look like clowns, whose spaceship looks like an amusement park. And this movie cannot be recapped. It has to be experienced. If you don't want to, because you don't normally go for scary movies, watch this. I promise you, this is the least scary thing ever. It's art house cinema at its finest. Everything that happens is funnier than the last. From popcorn guns, cotton candy cocoons, to air balloon dogs and kaiju clowns, shadow puppets, and the clowns also possess a dead cop. This might be a top 5 funniest movie ever to me. There was one single part of this movie that broke me so badly, I had to pause and laugh for 10 minutes. It's not actually funny, but it is to me. Prepare yourself for this. That's the funniest 8 seconds in cinema history. The face on the clowns is perfectly still, but expressing every emotion under the sun. I can't explain why it is so funny, but it hit in just the right way at the right time. If anyone ever claims this is bad, I challenge them on the fact. It's competently made, strong direction and cinematography, sets are great. The practical effects all look good. The acting can be less than good at times, but it doesn't matter because of the banger theme song. The reason this movie resonated so much with me is because of all the imagination in it. There are so many fresh, exciting, goofy ideas thrown in this. All from the single thought, what if clowns killed people? Stephen Cheeto and everyone who worked on this thoroughly explored that one question and came up with every answer in the book. It reminds me of so much conversations I've had. When given a hypothetical, you and your friends run with it and have the best time, coming up with new silly idea after new silly idea, laughing at things that are traditionally not funny, but you are letting go and having a good time. Turn your brain off and have a good time with Killer Klowns from Outer Space.
Do you think it's over?
Yeah, sure.
Here, you forgot your axe.
Elvira was one of the last movies added to the list, and it is the biggest flops in terms of being a horror movie. I wanted something to fill the Scooby-Doo role, but I've watched all those, so I took a shot with this. Turns out, this definitely isn't a horror movie. And I would say, it barely focuses on the Halloween elements for the first half of its runtime. Elvira plans to open an act in Vegas, but needs $50,000. But it conveniently turns out that she is the main beneficiary of her aunt who died. Elvira goes to a small conservative town in Massachusetts and is quickly shown to be an outsider. Her more laid-back and open attitude, along with her fashion style, makes her the outsider. Her uncle is a wizard that wants her aunt's old cookbook for some demonic reason. The town arrested Elvira on charges of witchcraft based on laws that date back to the Salem witch trial. They try to burn her alive, but she escapes. She has a magic battle with her uncle and banishes him to hell. The town accepts her, but she chooses not to stay, instead using the inheritance from her uncle to open up her show. This isn't really what I was expecting the Elvira movie to be. She has somehow managed to become a horror and pop culture icon through a relatively limited run of her show. A show in which she focuses mostly on B horror movies, so I thought some more of those horror elements would creep their way into this. But it turned out to just be more of a family movie with some raunchy comedy thrown in. This doesn't do much you haven't seen before, but it's been done before because it works. And it works here too. The sole reason to watch this is Cassandra Peterson's Elvira. She has nailed this character in her mannerisms. The confidence and willingness to stand out makes it fun. Putting Elvira in a super conservative town and seeing how they react is good. The charm of the performance makes some of the jokes you've heard 100 times before funny. Not many people could pull off jokes like these and make them funny still. If you have an investment in Elvira, this will probably be a fun time for you. But for somebody who doesn't have an attachment to her, this is more likely to be a waste of your time.
Unpleasant dreams.
This was another must-have. How could you dive into horror movies without Psycho? Placing 31st in the most recent Sight and Sound poll, this is a movie with a lot of lovers. And unfortunately, I have shockingly little to say about it. I fail to see how Hitchcock has gained his status as maybe the greatest of all time. All of his movies are just fine, this included. He clearly has a skill, able to elicit a higher heartbeat and tense feeling through music and editing. But that's all it is to me. A trick in making your heart beat faster, without much depth behind it. This movie spent the first 40-ish minutes focusing on Marion Crane, stealing money and going on the run. I was semi-invested in this part. But then, my level of care plummets once she shows up to the Bates Hotel and is murdered. The scene itself is iconic and great. But then we switch focus to her sister and boyfriend, who seem like throwaway side characters, and Norman, who is the most boring antagonist ever. There was nothing special or entertaining about Norman, but people seemed to be in love with him. The whole double personality came out of nowhere and felt like a rushed patch job to give Norman some excuse to not be all bad. All the story elements felt disparate, uninspired, and disconnected, leaving the entire experience to fall flat. I don't care for the artificial worry this gives me. It didn't earn the tension everyone claims it has. Tense music falls into the same lazy category as jump scares to me. It's a cheap way to make people feel scared, but it isn't actually scary. After all that, I'm left puzzled on why this is considered the classic it is. When I'm lukewarm on movies hailed as the greatest ever, I can normally see why people would love it. But with Psycho isn't the best at any one thing it's trying to do. I don't hate this. It's too inoffensive, plain, and boring to hate. And those three words sum it up pretty easily to me.
I hope they are watching. They'll see. They'll see and they'll know. And they'll say, why, she wouldn't even harm a fly.
This after her dad reveals he will be remarrying after the death of her mother a long time ago. Once at the aunts, some things are off, and Mac this otherworldly feeling from the fuzzy landscapes. The cinematography is very good in this. Some of my favorite shots include the bird's eye view as the girls enter the aunt's house for the first time, and there's one where the girls are walking around in a big circle while talking about what they should do. House sets its tone firmly in the make-believe, up directly from fears Chigumi had at the time, like a loud clock at her grandparents, or having her hand caught by a piano. I love when a movie can make me feel like a kid again, tied that the old generation and their thought process are exactly that, old. The aunt being so stuck in her ways it led to her death, only being preserved through Gorgeous. The old system is broken. I definitely think Gorgeous is gay and struggling with that, of what she should be. The archaic values says she shouldn't be this way. The movie itself challenges this, when the teacher who's supposed to be the knight in shining armor just turns into a pile of its need to experiment and stand out. And that's something I've grown to value in films. House is an instant favorite. Scream is the movie that kicked off the idea of 13 Days of Horror. I put out an Instagram story asking for movie recommendations, and somebody responded with Scream, a movie I probably wouldn't have watched without the push. And I instantly fell in love with it. That was a couple weeks ago, so before writing this, I rewatched it and it got even better the second time around. Something I've somehow avoided talking about up until now is the difference between a horror and a thriller movie. There's a very thin line between the two sometimes, but they are distinct, and Scream is a combo of both. But I think the main reason I love Scream is the fact it's mostly a mystery thriller. Scream is all about figuring out who Ghostface is. After the first murder, the object of the movie is to find out who. Red herring and evidence are scattered throughout. The police, school, children, and audience are piecing together evidence. And once Ghostface is found out, it's all over. Ghostface is not some unstoppable monster. He is one murderer, one that can be caught, and not being filled on who that is what elevates this movie. The writing in this is so smart. It kept me on my toes guessing who Ghostface was my first time watching. They rarely hint at the double Ghostface twist. It allows them to play with your expectations. For the longest time, I just thought Billy was a bad boyfriend and a dickhead. Not that he was the murderer. He was in jail. It couldn't be him. And he would be too obvious anyway. It's not the main red herring in horror movies. I had many suspects throughout this movie. At certain points, I thought it could be Randy, Tatum, Dewey, Billy, and Gail. There was a reason for everyone to be a part of it, but I was 100% on Stu being evil. He was my main bet on being Ghostface. During the scene in the movie store, Stu is unhinged. Matthew Lillard killed this role, his eyes wild and unglued. That laugh he does is unsettling. And somehow, I've never seen spoilers for this. The twist at the ending that there were two killers working together were an excellent reveal, and switch from the norm that feels fully satisfying. Also, on the second watch, I noticed some subtle hints that you could have picked up on. For example, in the opening scene, Ghostface tells the girl that he is at one of two doors. If she picks wrong, she will be killed. There was no wrong answer. Stu was at one door and Randy was at the other. No matter what she picked, she would have ran into one of them.
What door am I at?
What?
There are two main doors to your house, a front door and the patio doors. If you answer correctly, you live. Very simple.
Don't do this, I can't, I won't.
Your call.
While I'm here, this opening scene is brilliant. Set up how the kills went and what not to do. Perfectly escalates tension and fear. Starts with a shock for both the audience and the characters in universe. Casey, low-key, had the second best performance of this movie, slowly realizing what was happening, and some great horror reactions. As characters, Billy and Stu are so funny. Billy wants to get revenge on Sydney, so he stays in a committed relationship with her for a year. Takes all of this time to plan these elaborate stunts that could have gone wrong in a million different ways. Kills way more people than he has to just to get revenge on the girl he spends every weekend with. It's the funniest over-the-top revenge plan ever. And then Stu, he just does it because Billy is his homie. I love that he has no real motives. Dude just likes chaos.
Oh, Stu. What's your motive? Billy's got one. The police are on their way. What are you gonna tell them?
Peer pressure. I'm far too sensitive.
The Gail and Dewey relationship was what held this back a little bit for me on the first watch. David Arquette is an annoyance to me. I'm with Tatum. Dewey is a dork who doesn't deserve respect.
Hey, Dewey, can we go now?
Hold on a second.
God damn it, Dewey.
What did Mama tell you? When I wear this badge, you treat me like a man of the law.
I'm sorry, Deputy Dewey boy, but we're ready to go now, okay?
By the second time around, though, the relationship was more charming, even if it still is the weakest part of the movie for me. Gail showing up to report on the crime she was involved in while still bloody is iconic. I think every actor in this did good. I mentioned Matthew Lillard's Stu being the best, but I also really liked Neve Campbell and Rose McGowan's dynamic. You could feel their friendship. I was disappointed when Tatum died. This movie plays with the fourth wall and parodies a lot of horrors. I've been hypercritical of the self-aware meta-movie wave recently, but Scream does it in a great way, not smug or sarcastically, but out of respect and understanding of past movies. The director, Wes Craven, is a horror director. He understands the way audiences react to horror movies. He was able to make Billy obviously awful and the biggest suspect, because the audience had been trained to expect some third party. He hid Billy in plain sight. The last 30 minutes of this are pure cinema, raising tensions with characters you care about. Each beat makes you feel more and more, completely captivating and entertaining. Scream is an airtight movie that paced itself perfectly. I don't have anything I can say against it. It was a blast both times I watched. Scream changed the horror genre for a good reason, ahead of its time in so many aspects. A movie I'll undoubtedly throw on year-round. I'm really glad I got this one recommended to me, and I gave it a chance. I think it's gonna sit with me for a really long time.
Hi, this is Gail Weathers with an exclusive eyewitness account of this amazing breaking story.
Several more local teens are dead, bringing to an end the harrowing mystery of the mass killings that has terrified this peaceful community, like the plot of some scary movie. It all began with a scream over 911 and ended in a bloodbath that has rocked the town of Woodsboro. All played out here in this peaceful farmhouse, far from the crimes and the sirens of the larger cities that its residents have fled.
Okay, let's take it back to one. Come on, move it. This is my big shot. Let's go.
And done. 15 movies across 13 days. As I wrap up, I'll be showing a ranking of the movies I watched for this project. I came in hopeful I'd have this newfound love for a genre I dismissed before, and the results are varied. I feel like I'm more willing to watch a horror movie than I was at the start of this, but I don't know how often I will. I don't know how often I'll go out of the way to put on a horror movie. I found some movies I adore, and some of them are my new favorites. But I had to sort through tons of nonsense that annoyed me. After this, I still have zero desire to go watch Smile 2, Nightmare on Elm Street, or even the Scream sequels. The desire just isn't there for some reason. What I learned was to be more open, not to put movies in a box and judge them just by a label of the genre put on them. Every genre has its highlights, and you'd never be able to find them if you let the duds hit you. I had a blast doing this and found some true gems I'll cherish. If you have any criticism about the video, any movie recommendations, or want to talk about any of these movies, reach out. I'd love to hear from you.